What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Average Fan Podcast. We are back. First, a 1 week break or 1 week kind of before between episode of podcast, and we're doing it because obviously there's a lot that's happened. There was a lot that had happened previously. But we got a lot to talk about in terms of the U.S. Open Cup, the match against the Miami FC, and then the upcoming match against El Paso Locomotive. But Oliver, first off, how are you doing? Was there any snow down in Connecticut today? Because there was up in Massachusetts, and that was depressing.
I will say I woke up and I came out of my house and it was flurrying so hard that does not feel right. And then of course I leave my house, I get on the highway driving to Hartford, and it's like glorious sunshine. It's April, guys. What are we doing?
Why do we live here? Why do we live here? I always joke.
I could live in Miami.
I always joke with my wife. I'm like, why did your family came from Brazil, had 49 other, potentially 50 other states you could have, or no, 49, I'm bad at math. 49 other states that you could have chose, and you chose Massachusetts. That's
when
how
my
they
dad came here, he was working for a German company at the time, and they said, what?
Tony Scholes?
Yeah, my dad, Tony Scholes. No, when he came here, his company offered him the option of moving to Chicago, Atlanta, or San Francisco, and he chose Chicago.
Ooh, I feel like Atlanta would have been the go. So that would have been my selection.
And when he told me that years later, like obviously I was a tiny baby, I didn't know any of this at the time, but years later I was like, I could have grown up in Atlanta or San Francisco. That would have been dope, but
that would have been very dope.
We are where we are. We are the results of our lives. Who can complain too much?
Thank you for the deep introspection. And speaking of introspection into tactics, we're going to talk about Rhode Island FC, Hartford Athletic, the U.S. Open Cup match. The Open Cup match where the lineup was quite interesting. I think there was potentially a former USL League 2 goalkeeper in between sticks for Hartford, but Hartford did end up losing that match 2-0. I mean, considering the lineup that Hartford put out, I don't know how deep you can really go into the game. But what was kind of your reaction to the roster, the starting 11 that Hartford put out against your biggest rival at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Enzo Carvalho in goal. He played for Des Moines Menace in USL 2. They also had Jack Lura out there, who is a guy who had been on a short-term contract. Galen Flynn, who is a former USL 2 player. He's been very successful in USL 2, but these are guys who had very little, if any, professional experience before this season. And outside of that, even the guys who are regular professionals who were playing are for the most part not what you would call the first 11, right? Other than I think Jordan Scarlett, and maybe Junior Morera. These are guys who have not been starting a lot of league games for Hartford. I was not surprised by the lineup, right? Brendan Burke had been extremely clear. Multiple conversations I'd had with him, and I tried to communicate that on this podcast and in writing in the Blazing Musket that this is what fans should expect to see, was this really heavily rotated squad. And for two reasons. One, Burke has made it very, very clear that he does not see the U.S. Open Cup as a competition that Hartford Athletic should be prioritizing at this particular juncture in time, right? And I don't think that's to say that he thinks the competition is not worth anything. He was with Houston Dynamo when they won that competition a couple of seasons back. It's clearly not that he thinks the whole thing is garbage. But it doesn't make sense for this club at this juncture in time to prioritize it. So that was one reason. And the second reason was he doesn't have all the guys. Like Emmanuel Samadia is still in Sierra Leone. Babako Njai is not fit. Samuel Cariaga, Barry Coffey, all not fit, right? You had Mishin Galina coming back from an injury, not 100%, right? You have Adiwale Obalola, who was making his first appearance after being in that game after being away for a couple of games with a minor injury. So I did not see it as a game where I expected that we would see a strong lineup. I do think that fans who were a little frustrated by that, particularly fans who had gone to Pawtucket on a weeknight in the cold and the rain, were pretty upset I think, pretty frustrated to see what felt like, I don't want to say the B team, because some of these are guys who are going to have to play significant minutes this season and certainly will be relied on, but definitely not the stars, right? It's very much the same as if you're an NBA fan and you show up to see your favorite team play the one night they're in your city and they rest their starters, right? Which is happening more and more in the NBA. And of course, there are good reasons for that, right? The load on players, the minutes load has gone up and up and up. We know that's not good for their bodies. It is healthy for the players to get rested. And then as a fan, you show up and you don't get to see whoever you were excited to see, right? Um, so I understand the fan frustration with the lineup. And I think it's fair, we can talk about the Miami game in a moment, it's fair to ask if it really even paid off, right? The theory in some ways was that you would rotate the squad here, accept a bad result if it came your way, because it was more important to try and get points in Miami that would go towards getting this team into the playoffs and potentially getting a home playoff game by the end of the season. Um, I can see both sides of this. I can see Brendan Burke's perspective that, this is not the right competition for us to prioritize. We have limited resources. He doesn't have, he doesn't even have the benefit of having a strong academy where, like you might see in the FA Cup in England, where a Premier League team would say, early round game of this competition or early round game of the Carabao Cup, we're going to call up a bunch of these guys, give them their first senior cap, et cetera, et cetera. And we believe we can still get a result against, a championship side or a, League One or League Two side, whoever they might be playing in that first round. So there's limited options, and I understand the desire to prioritize the league. I also understand the fan perspective from the folks who are saying this is our, at least theoretically, our biggest rivals. It sucks to lose to them in a cup competition when it doesn't feel like we even really gave it our best effort. And also, like, we drove out there, and this is kind of what we got. I don't necessarily know that either one of those perspectives is correct, right? I think there's value in both of them. I don't think I wouldn't want to say that either one of them was more right than the other. And I think for managers all over the world, but particularly in a league like this, you're constantly having to balance a lot of those factors. Brendan Burke's comments after that game that he felt his primary role was to protect the players and to manage their workload and to manage their ability to do as well as they could in the competitions the club was prioritizing certainly makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, fans who are frustrated or unhappy that they're not seeing the best of their club every time also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and you did a great job, Oliver. You asked Brendan Berg kind of about the fan disappointment, especially considering the lineup. And I want to, don't want to put words in Brendan's mouth, so I'm just going to read the full quote here. Kind of in response to the fan disappointment, he said, "I couldn't care less. I have to protect this group. That's my core job. That's how we won a trophy last year. I protect this group. I view that as my primary job. We've had operational issues. We still don't have Samadia here. Sagoon just arrived. So the reality is I made the call to protect the larger group. And I think the group he put out was capable of winning that game. And they did themselves a lot of good against a desperate Rhode Island team. We were devastated in the locker room after the game. They cleared 2 balls off the line and Koke made the save of the game. In no way do I feel like we phoned that in. And to Brendan's point, I don't think they phoned it in. I don't think they didn't put a complete effort in, but I think maybe when you contrast it to some of the lineup that Rhode Island put out, I mean, they had Koke Vegas and that, a top tier goalkeeper. And I think, if you're being asked about fan response and your first instinct is to maybe say, well, I really don't care. Maybe keep internalize that thought as much as we love these great quotes, Brendan. But I think, you have to understand, like you mentioned, people, they're not just watching at home. They're traveling to Rhode Island. They're going out there to support the team. They're looking to see their, favorite players. They were hoping to see Anthony Saw probably rile up the Rhode Island FC fans. And they were really, looking to get one over on arrival. And, as much as we talk about, how many games Rhode Island FC and Hartford Athletic are playing and just kind of the craziness of it all. I mean, it's always better when you win games. And I think that, um, like you said, there is the part of it that you want to make sure that a group's ready for a league game. The league is definitely probably the priority, and I would probably say maybe second is the USL Cup, especially, obviously now the Hartford's out of the tournament. But I feel like potentially there could have been, some changes made to maybe put out a little bit of a stronger 11. Maybe even if it is just putting Anthony Saha in goal, or maybe starting another player. But it was great to see Scarlett out there. But I definitely think the fans do have some right to be like, why were we? They didn't phone it in, but they definitely could have maybe stepped it up in terms of the lineup that they put out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, obviously we saw in the second half a bunch of those guys came off the bench, right? Sebastian Anderson, Mishi, Augustine Williams, Sadat Inaku. And then we saw that in the second half it was a much more even contest, and Hartford realistically had the chances to come all the way back in that game and at least send it to extra time, if not win it in regulation. Rhode Island had to defend very, very well, and Goge Vegas did have to make a very good save. So, I think there's something to be said for if some of those guys had started or had played more minutes or been able to play more minutes, um, maybe there would have been something in that game for Hartford. But I think two things here. One, some of this does feel like it is a reflection of bigger problems with the club that kind of go above where Brendan Burke is, right? We heard, you know, that Hartford did not have kind of the full preseason that they would have hoped for, right? And that is an operational issue that is about the budget that's made available to Brendan Burke by Hartford Athletic, by the ownership. Um, if that's the case, that the ownership is not funding the club in this way, to have them create that full preparation, of course you're going to get soft tissue injuries. Of course you're going to have guys pick up a hamstring injury or whatever along the way, because they're not getting that full preseason where they're really able to work up to full speed and they're playing competitive minutes on not a whole lot of preparation. That's not great, right? If the squad isn't deep enough to really make a good run at 3 competitions, that's ultimately a resource issue, right? That's could there have been another $150,000 or $200,000 of roster allocation available to bring in 2 or 3 more full professional players who would have made this feel like it wasn't quite so thin, right? So that's one thing where I do think part of what Burke is navigating here is that he's, on the one hand, caught between the fans who want to see the strongest squad possible in every game, and on the other hand, maybe not fully having the resources that he would like to have available to make that happen. And then within that, trying to balance and make decisions about where you have to, where you want to prioritize. But all of which is to say, I do totally understand people who are frustrated by what they saw last week. The second thing I would say, though, is and not just because it makes for great content, I think that we have too many managers who don't speak with candor to the fans and don't speak with candor to the media, right? It would have been very easy for Brendan Burke to say something very blasé, bland statement about, I appreciate the fans' desire to win every game. I just felt like we had to rotate. End of story, right? I think the game is so much better when managers speak their mind, right? Like when you have people whether Jose Mourinho, right, is kind of the classic example of people of a manager, or Alex Ferguson, or some of these guys who will always say what they're thinking and are not going to censor themselves in the interest of not making anybody angry, right? I think the game is far more interesting when managers are honest when they're speaking to the media, because it gives fans a clearer sense of what's really going on. And I also think their personalities are much more interesting that way. Like Cano Smith standing on top of the stadium because he got a red card. Like, give me more of that shit, right? Like, is it dumb? Yeah, of course it's dumb. But that's the kind of stuff that I think really brings this to life in a way that it otherwise can sometimes feel kind of drab. If all of the managers refuse to give a comment, any kind of interesting comment to the media, I don't know, that kind of sucks, right? And not just because like it's our job to report on it or our job to talk about it and we want interesting things to talk about it, but it makes it all feel like there's no stakes, like nobody has strong feelings. And so the other one thing that I did really appreciate in this was that Burke was very, very clear, not just about why he'd made this decision, but that he didn't care that people were criticizing him. I don't know. I understand that that's probably going to make some people upset and angry in a different way. But I personally appreciate it when managers of any club are have that level of candor, I think it makes us more informed as fans, and it makes us more informed when we're commentating on the club. If he just said something very much like, "Oh, we had some guys who were hurt, and I made this decision, and I hope the fans come out next time," that would have made people feel better, but I don't think it would have been as illuminating. And I think the fact that there's illumination there and we were able to talk about that is really valuable.
Definitely, definitely. And, maybe part of the reason that there was kind of that fan disappointment is we'll move over to the game against the Miami FC, and Hartford wasn't really able to capitalize. It was a 0-0 game. You did see again, a large majority of the familiar faces compared to the match against Rhode Island FC. But as much as you possibly can from a lovely 0-0 game, Oliver, what were kind of your takeaways from the match? Just where do you feel Hartford was able to succeed, and where were maybe some areas of improvement?
Man, that was a really drab game. And I I think that what that game showed is that Hartford is not there yet. They just aren't. They've ground out results. They've got 9 points in the league, which is a great position for them to be in, but it is not clicking. And it probably isn't going to start clicking, I don't know, May, mid-May, late May. Now, they're in a much better position than they were last year, where it wasn't clicking and they weren't able to grind out any results. So that's good. But, you watch that game and it's a lot of long balls, a lot of long balls, a lot of long balls that aren't successful, aren't completed. Um, the midfield is really kind of a black hole at the moment. There's not a lot of ability to move the ball through the middle of the park. And because Samadia is missing, there also isn't really a lot of ability to move the ball down the sides. So it's a lot of hoofing it over the top and hoping Augustine Williams can hold it up and lay it off for Mishi or something like that. And that's just not very fun to watch. It's not very attractive soccer. And it's also currently not very effective soccer. And one of the things that was the case last season is that even when it wasn't particularly attractive, it was very, very effective. And it was very hard to argue with. It's much like, Jose Mourinho, parking the bus. Like, does it suck to watch? 100%. When it's winning titles, what am I going to do? Complain, right? If I'm a fan of one of his clubs. So I think what I observed in that game was it's not clicking. The pieces are not all in place. They desperately need Emmanuel Samadia back. Matt Real has stood in very well. Obviously, he went out injured in this game. TJ Prestis had to come in. Neither of those guys is on Samadia's level, and it shows on the pitch. And it's great to have those reserves. It's great to have those other options as backups, but they need what Samadia brings to the game. They're missing Samuel Cariaga. They're missing Barry Coffey. They don't have any creative force in the middle of the park, right? Beverly Makangila is holding up very well. Junior Morera looks like a much improved player from last season, certainly, but neither of those guys is bringing a ton of creativity. And the other guys, Hadji Pascalis and Hernandez, like none of these guys is bringing that element to the pitch in the middle of the park. And so it really just is very, it just isn't any spark at the moment. And the goals are coming from moments of individual creativity that cannot be sustained over the course of a season. The other thing I'll say about the Miami game is it also just drove home for me um, how much every team in this league is constantly fighting against the league's lack of interest in constructing a schedule that puts teams in position to succeed. Like this game kicked off at 4 p.m. in Miami. It was 80 something degrees at kickoff plus the humidity. Why are we kicking off at 4 o'clock? Like, I understand a 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or even a 2 p.m. kickoff in Hartford in March. I get it. I understand the rationale for that. That makes sense, even if it's not always great for the player's preparation. 4 p.m. in Miami? Well, I don't understand. And so you had this game that honestly neither team was particularly lively. It was hot. It was humid. The energy was kind of gone out of the game. Miami was barely in the game in the second half. I think they had one shot. And Anthony Sia had to be very alert to save that one shot at the end of the second half. But they had only one shot in the second half. They were tired too. Their legs were dead as well. So I also think that we have to put this in the context of the league still does not have that level of interest in building a schedule that works for every team that we would really hope for as fans. I don't know why. I don't know why the league doesn't prioritize that more, doesn't incentivize it more. It certainly appears that they don't care. And I don't want to say that's the case, but it appears that they don't care. Because we continue to see things like this where we have these kickoffs in the heat of the day for no reason. Or we have, kickoffs after nightfall in the north when it's winter, like for no apparent reason, right? Um, I don't know. That was really frustrating to me, and I think it harmed the product on the field because neither club looked like they were really up for that game.
I mean, Oliver, you can't expect the Miami FC to compete against Lionel Messi opening up new stadium. I mean, clearly there's overlap in those fan bases that you have to address for. But no, I think that is a very, very valid point on that
I
because,
will say, if that was the reason, if Miami was worried that they were going to get a smaller crowd, they don't
there's
get a
such an
crowd anyway.
Inter Miami fans, especially the last 2 years, and the Miami FC, the actual club of Miami.
I don't know. Like maybe this is a larger indictment of trying to can maintain this club in Miami. With if your main consideration for scheduling is when is Inter Miami playing, and I understand being thoughtful about that, another club in your market, right? That makes sense. Um, but if that's driving your scheduling decisions, and you're going to play in not the hottest part of the day, but in the heat of the day, rather than go up against like that feels like the wrong priority to me.
Yeah, I think the Miami FC should go out, sign Harvey Neville, really harken back to those original Inter Miami days. But kind of talking about it, you touched on Matt Real went out injured. I guess first off, any sort of indication of just how serious that injury could be, especially for a guy. Obviously, he's definitely not Lionel Messi in terms of age, but definitely isn't a spring chicken either.
Yeah, right now I haven't had a firm indication of how serious Matt Real's injury might be. Um, it didn't look great. I don't have. I'm not optimistic.
Got you. And
Um, anytime a guy is going off in the ninth minute,
yeah,
that's tough. We'll know a little more by this weekend, and if he does have to miss some time, Hartford has a real problem. Because their backup right now, the backup to him at that outside back position is either Jack Lura, who had a good career as a college player, but is not an experienced professional and cannot be expected to hold up over the long term. Um, or let me say that a different way. If he does hold up as a USL Championship player over the summer at left back, that will be the find of the season by any club. That you sign a guy to a 25-day contract and he turns into a guy who can regularly start games and be competitive. That will be an incredible signing. It seems unlikely that that's going to be the case. With Babakar Njai and Emmanuel Samadia both still not available, it really will put Hartford in a very, very difficult position. And if Matt Real has to miss any amount of time, I certainly can see Brendan Burke having a strong desire to add to the squad. I don't know if that will be possible for him, though. So, watch this space for, next week. We might have a little more clarity about that. But I'm not particularly optimistic about Matt Real's health at the moment.
yeah, and I think looking to maybe some of the positives, it seems like maybe even largely this year, the backline's performance, has been quite well. Obviously, I think you expect Anthony Saha to perform well. He had another team of the week performance appearing on the bench, but also, you had the back line, you had Scarlett, you had Dispay, had Fisher. I guess obviously getting the clean sheet does mean, something in terms of the defending. Just what are you kind of seeing from the back line and how are they performing considering, all the circumstances?
I think for the most part, they've been pretty disciplined. Um, we saw the kind of downside for them against Indy in the second half at home, where they gave up 2 goals on the counter. They got really just didn't react very well. But for the most part, they've been pretty disciplined, and we haven't seen a lot of those breakdowns. I think the other thing that has served Hartford well is it's the early season, and there are not very many teams in the league that are really clicking right now. That's pretty typical for the USL Championship. So they haven't seen a lot of attacks that are really firing on all cylinders. And so there might be a little bit of if Hartford doesn't really pull together a little bit more defensively, this might not look so great in a month's time, right? We get to the end of May or early June and people are starting to kind of pull it together. They might get a little bit more exposed. But so far, they've been disciplined. They haven't really made a lot of mistakes defensively. They've had some very good individual performances from guys like Sebastian Anderson or Matt Real or Artur Diz, right? Like, these guys have had very good individual games, which has been really good. Um, but I will say it's been encouraging, but I'm not fully sold on, Hartford having a great defense at this particular juncture.
Got you. And you mentioned going up against a team that has it together. I mean, El Paso Locomotive, they are humming quite well, especially in the attack with the likes of Rubio Rubin, Armando Moreno, Alex Mendez. I mean, these are some, top tier, high quality attackers. You have Moreno and Rubin with 4 goals each. You have Mendez with 2 goals, also has an assist to his name. I mean, looking ahead to this match against El Paso Locomotive, just what are your expectations for kind of how difficult it could potentially be for Hartford?
I mean, this is a game that could be really, really difficult. And I think different from the way that some of the when we talked about the Indy game or the Brooklyn game, my take on those games was that they could be difficult for Hartford because Hartford was missing a lot of guys, right? Not that these were particularly challenging teams to play, but Hartford didn't have all of their guys available. This game to me feels like a totally different kettle of fish. That this is a team where if Hartford isn't good or lucky, they could really be up against it on Saturday. You mentioned Moreno and Rubin. Those are guys, Rubin looks like a guy who could be the Golden Boot winner this season. He's going to get the chances in the way they're set up. He's a guy who has just been around forever and ever and ever and ever, it feels like, and never really been put in a spot where he's been the guy for the whole season. He was in San Diego, I think it was in 2020. They signed him like late in the season in that pandemic shortened season. He played only 4 or 5 games and he scored 7 goals, something like that. Like, he was absolutely on fire. And then he went to MLS and he just never he wasn't able to produce at that level. And then he was in Liga MX, I think, and back in the USL Championship briefly. Didn't play a ton of minutes with Charleston last year. Still had 4 goals in like under 1,000 minutes or something like that. And now he's the guy. El Paso wants him to be the guy. And obviously Armando Moreno is still there, so it's not like he has to be the only guy. But it runs through Rubin. He's the guy that they expect to be their top scorer and very easily could wind up as the Golden Boot winner if he stays healthy all year. Um, he's a level, honestly, I think a level of striker that Hartford has not seen yet this season, right? We look at the guys that they've been up against, like, Sporting Jacksonville doesn't have a proven USL Championship striker on the roster. Uh, Birmingham was missing Ronaldo Damas. They ran Romario Williams out there, who is clearly not at his peak anymore. Brooklyn was running with Juan Carlos Obregon, who has been a League One star, but never really at the championship. And then Miami doesn't have a guy who's fully proven, right, at this level. So you're looking at a guy in Rubin who is on another level as far as strikers go from what Hartford has seen. And to my earlier point here about, the defense, I'm not fully sold that it's great. He is going to be a stern test. And I think, we'll come out of this game, and if they keep Rubio Rubin and Armando Moreno off the score sheet, I'm going to feel a whole lot better about where this defense is. But I think we could also learn that maybe they're not quite as good as the score lines have suggested so far.
Yeah, and I think, even if you have a good performance, with the attacking talent that El Paso has, I feel like you're probably still going to have to, find the back of the net for yourselves in terms of just getting a point or, looking to get 3 and, considering the injuries, considering, you have new guys like Sadata Naku still looking to find their form. Who's gonna be the person to step up? Is it gonna be Augustine Williams? Is it gonna be Mishi? Could we see someone like Barry Coffey be able to return? I guess when you're going up against someone who's likely, going to be able to create in the attack and probably find the back of the net, who's going to be able to do the same for Hartford?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine we'd see a little bit more of the same that we've seen over the last few games, which is a lot of long balls. Trying to get Mishi or maybe Sadata Naku to get on the end of one of those. in some space. We saw against Indy, that if you give Sadat Anaku a little bit of space, he can score. He can score from outside the box. He doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be right up against it. We know Mishi has the quality. He's be another week of fitness under his belt, which I think is good. It was good to see him get substantial minutes in Miami, and be able to go through that whole game and still be pressing and getting into the attacking third and this late in the second half was a very good sign. Um, I do think it's going to be a little bit more of that. We're going to be putting the ball over the top. You're looking for Augustine Williams to hold it up maybe and get Mishi or Sadat Anaku maybe to get that opportunity. Um, it's not ideal. It's not what I would want to be seeing, but you got to win the games. You got to get the results right now, and then you hope that Barry Coffey, Samuel Cariaga, these guys become available further down the road, and you can maybe get back to what you'd sort of hoped to see a little bit more. So I would not be looking for Hartford to be playing attractive football on Saturday. I think they will be looking to maybe absorb a little bit more pressure, make sure they have guys behind the ball, and then get it over the top and hit much more on the counter than with that really heavy, high press that they've often employed under Brendan Burke. I don't think they're going to be able to sustain that because El Paso is too good in the attack. Um, one X factor here potentially. Um, we don't really know a whole lot about this new kid, right? Abdullah Taufik, it sounds like he goes by Sagan, is the name he's using. Um, I don't know what to expect from him, right? Brendan Burke is very high on him as a player. There are a lot of people who believe this guy has what it takes to succeed at this level and earn himself a move somewhere else. He could be in the same place that Mamadou Dieng was, where he's ready to go. And Mamadou Dieng was ready to go from the minute he got through the door here in Hartford. It took him, a little bit of time to put all the pieces together. But in his very first appearance for Hartford, he was obviously ready to play at this level. If this kid is in that same league and is obviously ready to play, he's going to be out there. Burke will put him out there. He has absolutely no compunction about putting the players out there that he thinks will succeed. So there's a little bit of an X factor there. I just don't really know how to evaluate him right now because we've seen nothing but a little bit of tape from a Nigerian developmental.
I mean, when it comes to looking at new players, no matter the league, I think we can all make sweeping judgments based on the type of music used in the tape, the amount of nutmegs and backheeled. So I think that's a clear indication. We can kind of, we can do some homework for everyone here. Go back, watch it. I'm gonna need how many backheels, how many nutmegs, and then we can kind of make an indictment. But I think it will be interesting to see because I think Hartford could use kind of that injection of life, and if you're able to get a high quality striker, and especially if Hartford is just going to continue to kind of hoof the ball forward, play very direct route one. I mean, if you have a big guy like Segun, that would definitely be very valuable. But I guess kind of wrapping up here, how do you feel about Hartford's performance so far this season? I mean, 5 games played. They're in third. They're 3 games off of the top of the Eastern Conference. I guess how does that kind of go with your expectations kind of entering this season? You've obviously talked about how Brendan Burke teams, especially with Hartford, seemingly have a slow start, but the fact that they've been able to stay towards the top of the table definitely seems impressive, considering everything that's been going up against them.
Yeah, I mean, 9 points here. We're just in early April is a great position for this club to be in, particularly when you consider that context. That this, I don't think Hartford has not in a single game been able to roll out anything like what you would imagine their starting 11 would be under ideal circumstances. Now, sometimes that's just the way it goes for a team, right? Like Emmanuel Samadia might never get his visa issue worked out. We don't know, right? And I think particularly in 2026, we shouldn't assume that this is like a foregone conclusion, right? That this is going to have a positive resolution for him. But when you look at how this team has been able to perform, like Galen Flynn, Jack Laura, like Spencer Gordon, like there is no universe where in February there was a plan for these guys to play minutes. Two of these guys weren't even on the roster. right? Let alone like, oh, I think they'll be, it'll be good to have them play serious competitive minutes for us this season. So when you take that full picture, I think this is a very strong position for the club to be in. Now, I think the rubber is kind of meeting the road here. Like El Paso is a much better team than any team Hartford has played in any competition. They're better than, better than Rhode Island, and they're certainly better than the teams Hartford has played in the league. Um, they're going to play Loudoun the following week. Loudoun is not really figuring it out, but there also have been missing key players. Like Abdulatif Abakora hasn't played for them yet this season, and he was the young player of the year last year, right? So I do think this next stretch of games where they're going to be at home for, I think, 4 straight over the next month is a period of time where we will start to learn something about this club and where they are. If we get through that stretch and they're scuffling, their defense is not really as good as it appears, the attacking pieces aren't there, guys are still hurt, then it's going to start to be a little nerve-wracking getting into the summer, right? Getting into May, getting into June, because it's going to feel like this is really not pulling together in the way that we wanted. So great to get those points booked. You can't take them away. They got 9 points, so that's good. It's way better than they were at this stage of the game last season. They're in a strong position. There are a lot of positives for Hartford. There are hopefully a lot of positives coming in terms of guys returning to full health and being able to fully participate. But this stretch of games is pretty important. If you look back to 2024, Hartford I think got 7 points from their first 4 games in the league, and then they lost 6 straight. And they got blown out by Louisville. They lost 6-0. They got blown out by Indy. They lost 4-1. There were some other games in there where they were really not very competitive. And that was coming as everybody else was starting to click and pull it together, and Hartford wasn't. So, let's see where we are maybe in a month's time. Good start. A lot of question marks still.
Definitely. And, before we go over, you mentioned the Miami FC, maybe potentially, we mentioned potentially scheduling against Inter Miami. I mean, is CT United their home openers, trying to, win the scheduling duel between Hartford Athletic? I mean, how excited are you for the Connecticut United home opener, Oliver?
Well, so I guess I'll contradict myself a little bit, right? This game is kicking off at 5:00 on Saturday, and Hartford's game is, I think, at 7.
I heard
If CT United was kicking off an hour earlier, I would go down to UConn to watch the first half before I went to Hartford, because I am very curious. We've seen really mixed results from this club on the pitch. There are games where they've looked good. There are games where they've not looked good. I think on balance, the fact that they've got a fully professional squad and they're playing a lot of essentially academy sides, they're going to be fine over the course of the season. But I am really curious to see where this club is going, not just as an on-field product, but as a business proposition. I'm still not convinced that this has the juice. I drive to work every day by a billboard that is a CT United billboard that says Connecticut's road to MLS starts here. And I will say, up until like 3 weeks ago, it was unclear where here was because they hadn't announced a home stadium. We now know that at least some of those games will be in stores and some will be in New Haven. But I'm just still not convinced by that component of it. I'm not convinced that there's any there from the club side. The soccer product on the pitch has been fine. Their academy seems to be fine. But there's more to operating a successful soccer club than those things. There have to be fans. You have to have a professional merch operation, ticketing. Their media communications has not been incredible from everything I've heard. Those are things that are very basic that you have to do at least some professional level, and they're just not there right now. But I don't know, live soccer is live soccer. I think people who are looking for something to do at 5:00 on Saturday should go down to UConn and watch them play. I think that'd be great.
I mean, yeah, you can maybe see, Hurley, and you can kind of ask him why it all fell apart. But I think it will be interesting.
Speaking of managers and coaches who have personality, right? Don't we people are
oh, no. I want more Brendan Burks. I do not want more Hurleys.
No, I don't want more Hurleys, but I think you need a Hurley. Like, you
No,
have to have a
you
guy like that.
need a diet, Hurley. You need a you need a little bit less. You don't need a literally going head to head like you're a soccer
Okay.
player.
I will say, I don't, maybe this is going to be like deep psychological insight into me, but I love that there are guys like that out there. Maybe it's, I grew up watching a lot of professional wrestling, and maybe it's just that for me, like, there's that brings in that element. But Dan Hurley putting Pat McAfee through a table at WrestleMania, you heard it here first.
I would pay money to see that, even though WWE is charging insane ticket prices. So
Right. And also WWE is terrible for other reasons that we can talk about on a different podcast.
I mean,
but,
yeah, for sure.
But no, I was just gonna say, I think personalities like that are really critical. Like, this is supposed to be like fun, right? It's supposed to make us feel stuff, and right, and I think the fact that people get mad at Dan Hurley is part of what makes sports great. Otherwise, it's only the athletic competition, and while like the athletic feats are important, right, and we love to see people performing at a very high level, seeing that they give a shit and that they care, even if we think they care on a level that might be psychologically damaging to them, like, I think that's awesome. I think it's great. We talked about Anthony Siaha before. Like, you got to have heroes and you got to have villains in sports, or there's no story, or there's no feeling. So I don't know. I'm all about it. If Dan Hurley wants to go toe to toe with refs every year and pay the fine, fucking love it.
I do think we need more Anthony Sahas. That's 1,000,000%. Can agree with that.
You just want to see a whole squad of guys doing the jerk off motion.
Yeah, I don't even need it, but we'll be very interested to see how Connecticut United does. And before we wrap up, I have a very important question for you, Oliver. Will there be porta potties in the parking lot for this game?
So all I can say on that is that I heard that the club did hear the feedback from fans, and that they really did take the opportunity to kind of do a little bit of postmortem on the home opener and think about where they kind of missed some of those things, right? I don't know what that's going to translate to on Saturday. I really don't. I'm not sure how much of those things are going to become kind of be fixed. But I do know that there were people in the club who took that very seriously, and were wanted to find solutions to some of those things. I think the porta potties thing, personally, I think that's just a very easy win. They're not. I've booked porta potties for events in the past. They're not that expensive. You just have to call. You literally, all you have to do is call in enough at time to make sure that they show up, and it's very easy to accomplish. I assume all that happened there is somebody forgot. There's been so much turnover in Hartford's operations department over the last 9 months or so that it just got missed. But I do know that the club really took seriously the critiques. They heard what fans said. They got a lot of negative feedback from season ticket holders and from supporters, and I do think there will be a concerted effort to have a better fan experience on Saturday. And they got a few games in a row now at home to try and iron some of those kinks out, to try and make sure that this is smooth sailing and that it works. If it doesn't, if we still continue to see some of these things be bumpy by the end of April or early May, that's going to be really concerning, because it's going to suggest not just that things got missed, but that there isn't the ability to correct. And that is back to the CT United question, right? You have to do some of these things at a basic level of professionalism. And if you can't do that, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we get the porta potties. Hopefully the beers, maybe instead of being for ants, they'll now be sized up for parrots.
3
But
times this big.
yes, they're going to be for very large ants. But no, really excited to see how Hartford does against El Paso. And as we always say, make sure to check out Oliver's work on the Blazing Musket. Recently put out the free thoughts on the RAFC game, and getting Brandon Bird's side of things was, very good work. And then also too, if you haven't already, make sure to check out our YouTube page. We talked about Esmir Bartarovich, so we got a bunch of new subscribers. But if you want to trade Esmir Bartarovich for Hartford Athletic, make sure to subscribe. And, make sure to check us out, the Blazing Musket. Ton of coverage, whether it's Hartford Athletic all the way down to the MLS Next Pro and Connecticut United. But Oliver, I'll let you have the last word. What do you want to let the people know?
We should not be bombing the fuck out of Iran. That's what I want the people to know. I don't know. I spent the day like, how are we living in this where the president is threatening to obliterate a people, obliterate a civilization. So if you take one thing away from this, other than any of my thoughts on Dan Hurley, it's this is bad and we should stop doing it.
Final word, call your congressman or congresswoman.
Call your congressman or woman.